Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'd like to talk with you about a concept that promises to transform the way that we help students with intellectual disabilities achieve success in school and life. That concept is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity suggests that we honor and celebrate differences among brains in the same way that we honor and celebrate biodiversity and cultural diversity. We don't look at a calla lily, for example, and say that it has petal deficit disorder. We honor it for the flower that it is. Similarly, we don't say of someone who has skin color that's different from our own that they have a pigmentation disorder or a pigmentation disability. That would clearly be racist. Similarly, we ought to be not pathologizing individuals who think and learn in different ways. We ought to be honoring and celebrating their diversity, and this includes students who've been diagnosed with intellectual disabilities. What I'd like to do in this video is share with you some strategies and tools that you can use either in the home or in the classroom to help your kids with intellectual disabilities become more of who they are, realize more of their potential, and really draw upon their strengths. And the most important strategy that you can use is to find out as much as you can about the strengths, talents, and abilities of this student. We really need to know what this student does well. You know, if a student is having difficulty in the classroom, for example, what they need more than anything else is to be surrounded by people who see the best in them and not thinking about them in terms of their pathologies or their disabilities or disorders. And so strength-based approach to learning is really the way to go. There in fact is some good research out there suggesting that people with intellectual disabilities have definite strengths that have been overlooked oftentimes. For example, the whole concept of intellectual disabilities raises the issue of what intelligence means. And if we look at Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, we can realize that students with intellectual disabilities may have problems with one or more of those intelligences, but not necessarily with all 7 or 8 of them. In fact, what we've discovered is that many of these students are very good in the personal intelligences. For example, students with Down syndrome. This syndrome used to be called informally Prince Charming syndrome, because people with Down syndrome are so friendly, are so warm, are so nurturing inside. They have a personality. There's also research suggesting that they're very good as mimics. They're very good in dramatization of things, using their body language and so forth. And so we ought to be tapping these strengths. There's also a form of intellectual disability called Williams syndrome that affects 1 in every 9,000 people. And it's a syndrome that in fact brings with it certain cognitive problems or difficulties. It's true, logical problems, spatial problems, and so forth. But the musical ability or musical intelligence is often very highly developed. These individuals often have perfect pitch. They're able to read music in some cases, even compose music occasionally. And the studies that have been done suggest that they actually have higher musical aptitude than a typically developing individual. So we ought to be studying more of that sort of thing, of the strengths of students with intellectual disabilities. Now, let's look at some specific learning strategies that can be used based upon those strengths. For example, we ought to be using cooperative learning. We ought to be using peer teaching. We ought to be having kids with intellectual disabilities teaching and tutoring younger kids because they have that nurturing capability. We ought to be teaching subjects like history and literature and math through dramatic role play. So, for example, doing a puppet theater to act out word problems, or dramatizing a historical period to learn about history, or doing a role play after reading a passage or reading a story. These are ways in which students with intellectual disabilities can demonstrate their strengths rather than always have their disabilities, their difficulties, their weaknesses revealed. There's also an assistive technology that can be really useful with them, especially with individuals who have significant communication difficulties. And that's a program or an app called Proloquo to Go. That's spelled Proloquo Q-U-O, the number 2, and the word go, all strung together. Pro loquo to go. And what it is an augmentative and alternative communication app which allows a student essentially to push buttons that have phrases or words on them, and then a synthesized voice will communicate that to the people that they want to communicate to. So, for example, a button might say, "I'm hungry." Another button may say, "I need help." Another button may say, "I'm feeling angry," or "I'm feeling sad." And so, in a not being able necessarily to communicate that verbally, they can push the button and have the app communicate it for them. And this app has been seen to be very helpful, not only with students with intellectual disabilities, but also with students who have autism spectrum disorder. We also ought to be thinking about positive careers for students with intellectual disabilities. Careers that are based upon what they do well, based upon their strengths. And so we were talking about personality and a nurturing capability. So we ought to be thinking about careers like child care worker, like animal caretaker. We also should be thinking of a hospital attendant as a possibility, or store clerk. There are many possibilities that involve human interaction and human personality warmth that can be a real plus in a workplace setting. And finally, we ought to be putting out there positive role models for these students, examples of individuals who have also been diagnosed with intellectual disabilities, but who have managed somehow to minimize their difficulties and maximize their strengths and really make something of themselves and maybe become famous or highly accomplished in a particular area. People like Gloria Lenhoff, who has Williams syndrome, who can sing opera in 26 different languages, including Chinese. And she goes all around the country and around the world singing and demonstrating and sharing her musical gift with other people. Similarly, Chris Burke, who has Down syndrome, is an individual who's an actor, a professional actor. In fact, he was the first actor with Down syndrome to star in a major sitcom on national television in the United States, on a show in the 1980s called Life Goes On. Chris Burke has done other acting roles. He also tours with a musical group. He is engaged with a newsletter. He's an advocate for people with Down syndrome, a wonderful role model. And also another example would be Karen Gaffney, an individual with intellectual disabilities who, in fact, with a relay team, swam the English Channel. Well, I hope these strategies have been helpful for you in thinking about how you can use the strengths of students with intellectual disabilities to help them become successful in school and life. If you want to find out more about these particular strategies or the research I've shared, or learn other strategies and tools that are out there, get my book, Neurodiversity in the Classroom, Strength-Based Strategies to Help Students with Special Needs Achieve Success in School and Life. Thank you very much, and my wish is that your students or your children with intellectual disabilities will use those strengths to make the most of what they have and bring their gifts to the world to make the world a better place. Thank you very much.